Hi everyone, welcome to Microsoft 365 UK user group. Really appreciate taking out your time to join us for the August edition of this user group. And so welcome to the community. And so we'll just kind of crack on with the agenda. Yeah, so today we have Thomas Vochten from Belgium and Jasper Oosterveld from the Netherlands. And so we got two great sessions. First of all, from Thomas on the GitHub and the in the intro for the IT Pro. So I'll let him do the introductions on that. And then we have the Teams session from Jasper later on as well. So we have a 2-hour event today. So that's obviously just a few minutes for quick intro and some announcements. And then we'll hand it over to Thomas. And then we have 50 minutes and we have roughly about 10 minutes break. But depending on how the session goes and with questions and everything else, we're kind of flexible with the break. So that's pretty much our timeline for today. For those of you who's not aware, I'm Chirag Patel, and basically the organizer for Microsoft 365 UK user group. And so pretty much a Microsoft 365 consultant in the last few years, but pretty much my journey started back in 2001 to thereabouts from a SharePoint and SQL Server DBA, and like many of you, changing careers and just kind of staying with Microsoft space, and really stuck with the collaboration information management space. So there's my details, and Tech Chirag is the handle I use for a lot of the social media. So feel free to get in touch with me, or if you would like to speak at Microsoft 365 UK, then I'll post the links later on, so you can sort of join us on that. So in terms of the next couple of months, we have got some sessions from Peter Rising and Laura, who will be presenting on the information compliance as well as Power Platform from Laura. And then in October, we have Joanne Klein and Leslie for the adoption sessions, as well as the compliance. So we got those sessions already lined up. And so if you haven't already registered, then head over to the meetup.com/M365 UK. So hopefully you can join us in the next coming months. And this session will be recorded, so if you do miss some things out, don't worry, it will be available on the YouTube channel, and I'll post the links later on as well, so you can catch up, as well as the previous month's sessions that we've had from other great speakers as well. So there's the details there for that. So basically, with that in mind, I'd like to just introduce Thomas, and I really thank for his time and effort for being here with us. And so, this is a great session. I have seen this session before, but that was like a year ago. But since then, a lot of things have changed. And so hopefully there'll be some exciting stuff in there as well, and a thing or two even for me to learn from as well. So with that, Thomas, I'll hand it over to you and take it away.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. It's always nice presenting for other user groups. I'm dealing with the Belgian user group a lot, but I always like doing presentations like these. The only downside today is that it's 30 degrees outside and also inside actually, so that's a little bit of a challenge maybe today, but I'm sure we'll manage just fine. A little bit of my topic for today is about Git and GitHub. It's of course something that is not really or not directly Microsoft 365 related, but many people, even if you're not developers, they come across Git and also GitHub. So we thought it was going to be a good idea to do a gentle introduction to the Git platform, also a little bit about GitHub, because there is definitely a difference. So it's going to be a technical session, but it's going to be level 100, maybe level 200 on introduction on Git. So if you've been using Git already for maybe 5 years or something, you probably won't learn that much tonight. But I'm pretty sure that for many people in the audience, this will be quite interesting, especially if you're not a developer. Now, before we start the session, it's important. It's a little bit a developer-y session, so it's important to switch to dark mode because developers like dark mode. So the rest of the presentation is going to be all black, like it should be, and true developer style. What are we going to be covering tonight? First of all, introduction to Git. What is Git? Where does it come from? Isn't that just for developers? What do we as, well, or me, because I'm not a developer, what do non-developers can get out of it? That's the first one. Second one, if you want to use Git, you of course need some tools. So you need to install some stuff on your PC. Don't worry, you're not going to see me install all these tools. I've got a few pointers and a few references to interesting websites where you can download all these things. And then we're going to dive into the basics, basic getting stuff done with Git. So that means there are some common scenarios that as a non-developer you probably encountered before, like people sending you a link to a GitHub page and they say, okay, everything is on GitHub. Well, you can find it there. So what are your options then? And after we've covered the basic stuff, there are a few other topics related to Git that you should probably be aware of. Mind you that we can talk about Git for a whole week and probably for more weeks full time. So it's a very extensive topic. But there are some essentials that you need to know, and I hope you will learn these during my session. Something else is that what is also important, I think, even if you're not a developer, is that there are a lot of possibilities to contribute to open source, even when you're not a developer. Even if you cannot write a single line of code, although, well, like if you're an IT pro, PowerShell is also code, of course. But even if you're not a real developer like myself, there are still many possibilities or interesting projects that you can contribute to. And we'll get to that at the end. Just a very quick about me. It's not as extensive as Chirag one's. So yeah, but I try to cover the basics. So I'm Thomas. I'm an MVP from Belgium. I'm a technology evangelist, which is a very fancy word that just means I like to talk a lot. That's the same as MVP, being an MVP, basically, because we like to talk a lot. I'm heavily involved with the BUIG, which is not the BI user group. It's the Belgian Information Worker user group, which is the, let's say, Office 365 user group in Belgium. We used to organize SharePoint Saturday Belgium for a very long time. This year we are going to try something else. We're organizing Collab Days Benelux. So that's in, I think, October 24. And you can find some pointers online if you want to attend. It's also going to be a virtual event. And I work for the Kronos Group, a big technology company in Belgium. Best way to reach me, if you've got any questions afterwards, is probably through Twitter, although I do have an email address. I've got a blog, but I must warn you, it's more of an announcements platform maybe than a really interesting technical blog.
Thomas, sorry,
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. Could you minimize the screen on the right bottom? You know, the recording screen.
This one.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Producer. Introduction to Git. What are the basics? I think before we can talk about Git, it's good to take a step back and look at, okay, where does Git fit into the whole ecosystem of tools and developer tools? That's important even if you're not a developer. I mean, come on. A bit slow today. Yes. So developers, and it's not the main audience for this presentation, of course, but developers have a lot of what they call good practices or best practices or design patterns or all kinds of standards that they want to adhere their code to. Very fancy words like simplicity, portability, predictability, maintainability. But developers, and those are all characteristics of a very good code. But developers don't really like these fancy words. Developers like to create acronyms. And don't worry, we'll get to Git. These are three of the most important acronyms if you're a developer: DRY, KISS, and YAGNI. I'm not sure if you've ever heard about them. DRY stands for don't repeat yourself. KISS stands for, well, that's a well-known one, keep it stupid simple. And YAGNI, I like that one, is you ain't gonna need it. I mean, developers, they have a lot of coding practices, coding standards that they want to follow, and these are a few of the most important ones. You might already think, okay, where does source control come into play? But we'll get to that in a minute. There are a lot of other acronyms and very fancy words. This is my personal favorite. I don't know if you bonus points if you know what this means. It's a very good one, actually. It means do the simplest thing that could possibly work. It's a very nice acronym. I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but okay. So developers have all these, let's say, philosophies, coding practices, which are very interesting, even if you're not a real developer and you're trying to create PowerShell scripts, for example. A lot of these good coding practices can be important or interesting for us as non-developers too. So we can learn from them as far as philosophies, principles are concerned, but also when it comes to tools. And that one of those main tools are we going to talk about today. Git is a source control system, and I think we all know the problem. If you're working with Microsoft 365 or Office 365 or SharePoint, you've probably talked to your customers before about how they should use version control in SharePoint to avoid stuff like you see on the screen on the right-hand side. Now, these are PowerShell scripts, but same is true for Word files, for example. So it's a little bit the same, actually. So I've been creating PowerShell scripts for the last, well, since PowerShell came to market, basically. And in the beginning, and well, maybe I should admit, maybe not only in the beginning, I sometimes occasionally do that myself still, is work like this. So you've got a directory, you create a file, a script to do stuff, PS1, then you create a version 2, then you deploy that version at a customer or you use it at a customer. In the meantime, you're also working on version 3, and then you say, well, I did it completely wrong. Let's do a version 4. We use that version at customer B. And then we decide, yeah, just a normal PowerShell script is not good. We want to convert it to a module, and we use that module in our own company, etc., etc. And then the problem starts. First of all, it's not really easy to maintain because, yeah, you're looking at, in this case, maybe 10 different scripts. Okay, how do you know which one is current? So the name is already important there. In this case, that's not really convenient. And let's say you deployed version 4 at customer B. But, well, you really want to make some change to the original version 4. So afterwards, you have to copy that manually, all these changes to the version that you deployed at customer B, etc., etc., etc. So you know what the problem is, right? So that's one problem, the version control. The second problem is, what if you mess it up? If you change something in, let's say, script v3, you change something, you save it, and afterwards you realize, oh no, I made a horrible mistake. I probably deleted half of the file by accident. How do I go back? If the file is on your own PC, you can maybe, I don't know, hopefully it's in OneNote or in OneDrive or something. You can go back if you want, but you get the idea. It can become very complicated. Something else is where do you store these files? Do you store them on your laptop, on a file share, God forbid? Do you store them in OneNote? Something I'm also guilty of doing, actually. I store a lot of old scripts in a OneNote file, very convenient if you want to do a search, or somewhere on a cloud storage. So if you treat code, and PowerShell is also code, if you treat those as traditional files and you work like this, there are some problems that you might run into and that you probably already have run into. And that's where source control comes into play. Source control can be used for many different things, not just what I showed you, but it's a safeguard basically. It's a central repository or a central place where you can store your files, and it doesn't have to be code. It can also be a PowerPoint file or a PDF, or maybe, well, basically any other file that you can store on your file system. You can also keep in source control. Even Word files if you want. Now, if you really want to create a document management system in source control, it's probably not the best idea. We have better tools for that. like SharePoint, of course, or OneDrive or whatever, or within Teams. But for all other files you're not really collaborating on, but yeah, you're working together on code or on documentation. Very typical example, source control can be a good solution. Something else that source control enables you to do is to work together with other people. The example that I showed you before, if you just keep those files in your personal OneNote, well, okay, you can share a OneNote if you want, or if you just put them on your PC, it's not really convenient to work together with other people. Now, in the demonstrations I'm going to do later on in the presentation, I'm not really going to work with other people. Most of the demonstrations or scenarios that I'm going to show you are targeted at single person team, maybe, but I will explain you how it works when you work with multiple people, because that's exactly what source control allows you to do. Something else is that we really didn't touch upon yet is you might have a stable, well, let's call it code base or a stable PowerShell version, but you're thinking about the next version. But you still have to maintain the original version that is used in production. How do you do that? On a file system, you would probably copy a directory, paste it somewhere else, give it a new name with new version, something like that, and start working there. But what if the original version changes and you want to keep these changes in your new feature, in your new product? That can be a problem, and this is also something that source control can help you with. So there are many source control systems on the market. You might have worked in the past with stuff like, well, a very long time ago, I used to work with VSS, Visual Source Safe. That was, yeah, horrible. I think we all agree if you have worked with that. I've worked with Subversion. I worked with a lot of other source control systems. But I think nowadays, the de facto standard is probably Git. Git is a free and open source version control system. So you can just download it yourself if you want and install it on your PC, and that's exactly what you need to do if you want to work with Git. But it's also, and the magic word here on this slide is distributed, and that is also what sets Git apart from many other source control systems, and that's also, I must admit, why it can be quite complicated. The basics are not really difficult. But once you get going, once you work with different people and have a very complex structure, it can be very, very, very complicated, actually. I talked to many developers who have been using Git for the last, I don't know, 5-6 years, because that's when it became quite popular in the Microsoft ecosystem. And many people still, after all these years, have problems sometimes with very specific things. But if you want to understand the basics, you can't really get wrong with just what I'm going to teach you today. So distributed is the key here. Okay, we talked about Git. What about GitHub then? GitHub is just Git, but running, hosted with Microsoft, because it's acquired by Microsoft in 2018. You can also install Git on your PC. In fact, you have to do that if you have to work with Git. But to be really safe and to work together with other people, you need also somewhere a central Git installation, and GitHub is one of them. It's the de facto standard. I think I don't have percentages, but many people use GitHub. There are some alternatives, and there are many more than what I mentioned on the slide here. There is stuff like Bitbucket, GitLab, and also Azure Repos. Azure Repos is also a Git installation hosted by Microsoft inside of Azure DevOps. So you have the choice, basically. And if you work with Azure DevOps for other things, you even have the choice to host your stuff in Azure Repos or in GitHub or somewhere else. So that's the main difference. Git is the source control system itself, and GitHub is a hosted version of that source control system in the cloud, hosted by Microsoft. In this presentation and also during the demos, I'm going to use both. So I'm going to use Git on my PC, and I'm also going to take advantage of the hosted version to store everything, and then you're also sure it's also backed up. GitHub offers a lot more possibilities than the hosted Git itself. You can also use GitHub to manage your projects, your issues, your risks. You can publish your roadmap there if you want. Many other possibilities. There are some automation possibilities with GitHub Actions. That's fairly new. So it's very extensive, but that's not the focus for today. We're going to focus on the source control features of GitHub today. Okay, I'll give you a few seconds to read this while I'll take a sip of my water. It basically explains us that Git is complicated. Many people use Git, but as I said before, it's quite easy, especially if you work with multiple people on a bigger project, to get into trouble. And what many people do, basically, is what this gentleman, I think it's a gentleman, does here, is just delete everything from your PC, start over, and pull down a fresh copy of the stuff you're working on from GitHub, for example. You could do that. I'm not saying it's a good idea. It's probably not a good idea. It's definitely not a good idea. But just to illustrate how complex it can be, sometimes it's so problematic or so complex that people came up with sites like this. So there is a website called ohshitgit.com where you can go to find solutions for very common problems. For example, you change something and you can't get it back. How do I do this? That's a site was pointed out to me by Andrew Connell, a very known SharePoint developer. And I've used it already, quite some times actually. So this website, it's quite good. It's not a big website. It's just, I think it's just 1 or 2 pages with this very common solutions to problems that people do wrong all the time. And if you're offended by the name, oh shit Git, there is also a slightly different version with the same content actually, and it's called dangitgit.com. So that's maybe a little bit more suitable for work. So this site will exactly tell you what you should do if you mess something up big time in Git, and then it will tell you what to do. So definitely something to bookmark if you're working with Git. Before I show you how the basic commands work, it's probably a good idea to look at what tools you need to install on your PC to work with Git, because there is a hosted component in GitHub if you want, but you can also just work standalone on your PC and create your version control system standalone if you want. But in any case, you need the Git tools. So these are the tools that I use very commonly when working with source control. Of course, Git itself, it's something you need. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And then you need a shell to interact with Git. Git has a few commands, well, has a lot of commands. You can just use the built-in Windows command prompt if you want. You can use Windows PowerShell. You can use PowerShell Core. Whatever you use, if you install Git, it will work. Git will also install the Bash shell on your PC if you want to do a more Linux style. If you want to work Linux style, that's also possible. But I like to use Windows Terminal. So Windows Terminal is newer. It's not that new anymore, but it's maybe a year old. It's the new terminal from Microsoft, and all the examples, all the code I'm going to show you, all the commands are done to Windows Terminal. I especially like Windows Terminal because it's quite modern. You can also change the colors, you can change the look and feel a great deal. So it's really flexible. It has tabs, but if you're working in this area, you probably already installed Windows Terminal and tried it yourself. And last but not least, Visual Studio Code. Now, as I said, I'm not a developer, but I still use Visual Studio Code a lot. I use it to work with PowerShell, but I also use it to author documentation in Markdown, because many documentation, especially from Microsoft, are written in Markdown, which is a very simplified HTML, basically. And Visual Studio Code has a very good, very good support for that. So today I'm going to show you all three. So a lot of Git and Windows Terminal and a little bit of Visual Studio Code. If you've looked at demonstrations before, or you saw people or developers work, you probably noticed that their command shells looked nothing like the out-of-the-box command prompt. This is a screenshot from my PC. it looks something like this. So you have the current working directory, and then you have a few colors. There are 5 or 6 colors, I think, and all very interesting symbols. These are helpers that you can install on your PC to make your command prompt aware of the Git repository you're working with. So everything we store in Git is stored into a repository. It's like a folder, let's say, and that folder can have a certain status. It has a name. In this case, it's called main, and there are a few things there. That means, for example, you can see visually immediately if you've changed a file, if you still need to commit a file to the source control. Very, very handy, and it will also automatically show in which branch you're working, for example. And I'll get to branches later on to tell you what those are. So this is quite indispensable if you're working with Git. It's a good idea to have this. This is a screenshot from Visual Studio Code, and I'm usually working in PowerShell. So, but this will also work if you don't use PowerShell, if you just use the regular command prompt within Windows Terminal. Now, I'm not going to show you how to do this. At the end of my presentation, I also have a reference article that will from the Microsoft website that will detail you in a little bit more detail how to get this fancy looking Git support into your Windows terminal. These are basically the steps. So you have to have Windows terminal. You have to install a capable font, because all these little glyphs, all these little arrows and everything, they're all supported by a font, a Powerline capable font. Good example is Cascadia Code, which is an open source font provided by Microsoft, which you can download for free, which has this support out of the box. And then inside of your PowerShell, you have to install a few modules, Posh Git, which means Git integration for PowerShell, and another module, Oh My Posh. Yeah, well, I like these names. Oh My Posh, which provides for the colorful integration together with Cascadia Code, and then you have to set a theme, but that will all be explained in the article. And last but not least, you have to change your Windows Terminal profile settings to actually use the font, because you can install a few things, but you still have to tell Windows Terminal to actually do something with it. So that's, in a nutshell, what you should do to make your prompt a little bit prettier. Okay, I've talked about Visual Studio Code before. Now, I don't use Visual Studio Code that much for the actual Git integration. If I want to, let's call it upload or download something to GitHub, I'm usually doing it through a command prompt, because it also allows me to get to know the system a little bit better, also to learn. But there are some very, very good integration possibilities with Visual Studio Code if you want to do it in a more graphical way, or with a GUI. By default, Visual Studio Code supports all the most common Git commands. So everything I'm going to show you today can also be done through Visual Studio Code. And then there are some very useful extensions, and these are the 3 ones that I always install, is Git Lens, Git History, and GitHub support. Git Lens, for example, I'll show you that later on in demonstration, enables you to see what changes occurred in line in your code or in your documentation. Git History provides for a nice graphical representation of the history of a certain file or a certain folder, so you can see what exactly has changed in the past. And GitHub support enables you to do pull requests and everything with nice GitHub integration. I'll get to pull requests later on, by the way. So I urge you to absolutely install these 3 ones. All right. Getting basic stuff done with Git. In the beginning, if you start working with Git, it all seems a little bit intimidating. At least for me, it was. So it's always good to maybe take a step back and look at some essential things, essential words that you hear about all the time when people are talking about Git. I dumbed it down a little bit. No offense, but it's to make it a little bit more understandable. If you just want to download code from the internet, that's what I'm going to show you in a few minutes. That's called cloning. Often people say, "Okay, you can download that from my GitHub repo." That's something that's done all the time. That's called cloning. If you want to change something that is already existing and you want to you want to create your own version of something existing, that's called forking. If you want to create a separate area, some people call it a parallel universe, to work on different stuff, it's called branching. We'll get to that later on. If you want to check in your changes, it's like uploading something in SharePoint, for example. It's called committing, so you can work. And if you've done your work, you commit something to the repository. If you also work with a remote repository, for example, with GitHub, so you can work locally, commit something, and then push it to or upload it to GitHub, that's called pushing. Or if you want to get changes from the remote repository, that's called pulling. In the beginning, pushing and pulling is a little bit difficult to understand, especially if we're talking about pull requests, because if you start working with Git, you often wonder, okay, why are these not called push requests? But that's a very common misunderstanding or very common problem. But that will all get a little bit clearer at the end of my presentation, hopefully. And last but not least, there's something called merging. So if you've got different changes made by different people, for example, or in different branches, and you want to integrate them all together again, that's called merging. I'm going to try to show you most of these concepts later on in the presentation. Be aware, though, that if you work with Git, there are a lot of conventions. Some things, for example, forking is something that is just a convention. That means if we copy something from one repository to another to work on, it's called forking, but there is no git fork command, for example. That's a typical example. For example, if you by default create a Git repository, you will end up with a root branch, that's called, and that's always called master, for example. That's also just a convention. Many people rename that now to main, for example, because of the negative connotation of the word master. So that's all possible. So be aware, not everything that we're going to talk about is set in stone. Many of those things are just conventions, and people agreed on the way they work. So first demonstration, the most basic operations. Let me try to share my screen. No, it's already shared, of course. What happens a lot is that someone like me, during a presentation, they say, you can find that on GitHub. And then you click on a URL and you end up on GitHub, in this case, github.com/thomasvochten/presentations. It's quite obvious what that means, of course. It's a repository. It's a repository where I keep my presentations. Well, I just created it today, so I have a little catching up to do. But today's presentation is already present there. So you have a README file, okay, presentation materials and slides, and then you have a folder for today, and then I've got a PDF version of my presentation here. Okay, this is a PDF document and a Markdown document, but it can also be PowerShell, of course. It can be anything that can be stored in Git. So let's say you want to download that presentation. There are a few possibilities. You can just go to the file and then open it, and then there's a download button. Then it will just download that file from GitHub. But you could also clone the repository itself. Why would you clone the repository? For example, if you, you want to keep that repository up to date. Let's say it's a little bit like the OneDrive sync client, actually. So you synchronize that presentations folder to your PC, and every time I add a new presentation, you can make sure that you have the latest version, stuff like that. Or if you know already beforehand that you're going to want to contribute to this repository, well, it's also a good idea to then clone this repository. So how do we do this? We have a big code button. It used to say something else, but I don't remember what now. Also here, you can just download the zip file, but then you'll get a snapshot of my presentations repositories point in time. But you also have this URL here. It's if you've got Git installed, you can copy the URL and then go to a folder on your PC. In my case, it's dev, and then you can say git clone and then paste that URL in. Now, When I installed Git, I also installed the connection to GitHub. So usually this is authenticated. So I already put in my username and password, but that's not really nice for this presentation. So that's already done. I did that before. So git clone, and then URL, and then enter. And then it's going to, well, download everything from the repository to your PC. And if you go down to your directory, we've got a presentations folder there. Let's switch to the presentations folder. And you immediately see, okay, I've got this fancy Git integration. I'm in the main branch, which is the root branch in my case. I don't have any other branches because it's just the presentations folder. So I have my main branch, and it's green. So that means that everything is okay. That means that the version of the files on my PC and the version of the files in GitHub are exactly the same. If you want to have some more information, you can always issue the command git status. And it will say, okay, you're up to date. Your branch is up to date with the branch in the cloud, and it's called the origin. That's also a convention, by the way, the name origin. So your branch is up to date with origin main. Oh, fantastic. Okay. What we see here is the files that we downloaded. We have the directory, we have the README markdown file, and hopefully the presentation is also in there. You can have a look with Explorer if you want, Windows Explorer, and then you see exactly that, the README file, and hopefully my presentation is here. There is also a hidden directory. Now I made sure to show hidden directories because by default you don't see them. There is a .git directory. Don't mess with this directory because that's your source control. So if you do anything with these files here, well, you will end up with a horrible mess probably. So never ever touch this directory. So okay, these are the files. Perfect. That works. Now let's say someone or I change my README file. I'll do that on another computer, or someone else does that, but this is a little bit of simulation. Let's put something else. Hello, M365 UK. And let's save this. It's a little bit unorthodox what I'm doing right now because you probably should not save those files right in GitHub, but it's to simulate what would happen if someone would change. So I change my README file, presentations, hello M365 UK. Let me go back to my PC. Let's go to the presentations. Let's go to the README file. Let's open it. Yeah, it's not there because we didn't pull down these files from the origin. So we can say git pull, and then it will notice that there is a new file in the cloud, and it downloaded it, and it noticed two changes. So let's go to the README file now, and you'll see, okay, we've got the latest version. So whenever you clone a repository and you want to keep it up to date, let's say you want to clone the, I don't know, Office 365 or Microsoft 365 PowerShell PNP commandlets or some documentation, do git clone, and then from time to time, if you want to make sure that you've got the latest version, do git pull. That's what you can do. The other way around, if you want to add something to a repository, that's a little bit the same. So I go to my presentations folder. Should not forget to delete it after the presentation. I create a file, hello world, what else? Simple text file, world, save that, and go back to our command prompt. And you see that the color of my prompt changed because I added a file. And the system knows automatically that I'm not tracking this file yet. So it notices the file, but it knows that it's not included in the source control yet. So I have to add it to the source control with git add hello world. Then it's added, but still we still have to commit it. So we told the system, okay, we should do something with it, but now we're going to include it into the source control, and it's done through git commit. And with a git commit, you also have to pass a message. Let's say hello world, upload, something like this. It's committed, and then the color changes again, and it's now, I think it's pink. And everything is included in source control locally, but it still needs to be pushed to my GitHub repo. Because if I go now here and I go to presentations, well, there is no hello world file. So we do need to do git push, and then we push those changes to the cloud. And with a little bit of luck, that actually works. It's green again, so we're in sync. So we refresh, and then we have our hello world file here. These are the most basic principles. I've shown you that through the command line interface, but you can do the same thing actually through Visual Studio Code if you want that. I showed you how you should always, when committing, include a message. The problem is after a while that when you've got like 25,000 commits, it's always a little bit difficult to come up with an original commit message. Yeah, that's something else. Okay, I've already showed you this, how that works. So we're going to the next slide. Let's say you create a repository in GitHub that is empty. You haven't done anything with it yet. So if you create a new repository and you don't include any files from the start, no README file, nothing, you will get a screen like this. And that's what I like about GitHub. It will automatically tell you what you should do, right? So if you've got an empty repository and you've got some files on your PC that you want to put in there, it tells you exactly which commands to use. Let me show you the VS Code integration. Again, the simple scenario. You can launch, by the way, if you don't know that, from the command line, from the command prompt, you can do code and then dot, which will open Visual Studio Code in the current directory. And then after a few seconds, because I've got a lot of extensions, which is sometimes a little bit of a problem, after a few seconds, the Git integration will start. So you see my files here. And after a few seconds, come on, it will automatically notice that I'm using Git here. Hasn't initialized yet, probably because I didn't do my sacrifice to the demo gods this morning. So it will take some time. Don't know what's happening here. Come on, let's change something. Force it to look for it, to look for my change. Yeah, so what you see here, for example, is the git lens extension. So it tells me, okay, this line has been changed by you a couple of seconds ago, and this first line here has been changed by you also a few seconds ago, of course, because it's quite new. But because I changed the file, this lights up here. There's one pending change. And what we did through the command line, you can do that exactly the same here. So you can add a file, you can commit a file with a message, commit, give it a message if it wants to enter. Come on. Come on. Just because I'm presenting. And then you can push, but yeah, apparently my Control-Shift doesn't want to work right now, but you get the idea. So the integration is actually quite nice. Right. So don't know why this thing is not going away here. Okay, yeah. Where to go next? Because this was the absolute basics, and I only have 5 minutes left or something. Where to go next? There are many concepts that you need to know before really working with Git in a large project, and the most important ones are explained here: is branching and merging. Because what I've shown you to the demonstration is we've got one branch. These are the green colored here. This one is called master, but it can be called main or something else. This is the main, let's say, the main version of your code or documentation, the green dots here. So, but at a certain point in time, you maybe want to change something because you found a bug, or you want to introduce a new feature, or you want to reorganize everything. And that's when branching or branches come into play. So by default, we have one branch, but we can also create a second branch. These blue dots are a second branch. You can give that branch a name, for example, I don't know, new feature, something like that. And then you keep working on this code. And in the end, when you're done, you can merge your changes back into the main branch or the master branch. That's the idea. Now, it sounds very simple. Depending on what you do, it can also be very simple, but depending on what you do, it can also be very, very complicated, because you can imagine if someone changes something in the main branch and someone changes something in the work branch and there's a conflict, merge conflicts, that's a very big deal in Git. You need to deal with them. So that's the basics. So you want to do something, you don't change that immediately in the master branch, for example, because it's your production code. You create a branch, you do your work there, and then you merge back together. In the meantime, someone else can also take another branch, because this orange one is another branch, and they can also integrate it to the master branch. If you're working with a repository where you don't have enough access, for example, you want to change documentation for Microsoft, you obviously don't have direct access to the master branch, and you need to ask someone else to do this merge, and that's called a pull request. So you make your branch here, and you ask the owner of the master branch, okay, please look at what I've done. Is this okay? And then they can integrate that into the master branch. That's the infamous pull request that you keep hearing about. What you can also do is, while you work in this feature branch, in the meantime, the code in the master branch has maybe changed. So from time to time, and that's a very good practice, you can merge the changes that have been done to the master to your work. Now there's one arrow here, but there can be multiple ones. So that's definitely a good practice. It's a little bit simplified, but that's mainly how branches and merging work. But you have to be careful, of course. Now, luckily, GitHub and Git, the help system is quite good. But Visual Studio Code gives you also a little bit more help there if you run into trouble. But that should be that should be okay. I don't think I have time to do my demo on branching and merging, unfortunately.
Thomas, that's fine. You can carry on. We got about
yes,
10 odd minutes. Yeah, absolutely. We're flexible. Don't worry.
Yeah, I'll do the rest of the presentation first, maybe, and because I've got a few other slides that I absolutely want to touch upon, and then we'll maybe, if we have time, we come back here.
No problem.
That's maybe a good idea. So after we've learned the basics of Git, how do we contribute to other people's work? How do we contribute to open source, or even how do we contribute to code that is running or that is hosted inside of your company? Sharing is caring. That's what we like to say in user groups all the time. Everyone can contribute. Many people I talk to say, well, yeah, but all these very bright minds, they're working on these PNP projects, for example, and I'm not sure if I can do anything that is of any use. There is always something. I mean, for example, a good example is Microsoft documentation. If you go to the Microsoft documentation, and I'll show you how that works, you can just edit that documentation now, or you can propose some changes. That's something everyone can do. I've once, I think, issued a pull request because Microsoft documentation mentioned something as on-premise, where it's clearly on premises, right? If you see something, a typo, something small, or something that they forgot, just issue a pull request, and with a little bit of luck, that gets integrated into the documentation. So that's quite okay. There's PowerShell scripts, PowerShell modules, open source initiatives. There are a lot of them. If you look around a little bit, there are many opportunities to contribute back to the community if you want. And like I said, even documentation. This is an example of how you can do this within Microsoft. Now, I'm by no means a developer, but I think I'm one of the contributors on this page. Set up your SharePoint Framework development environment. I wouldn't even know how to program with SharePoint Framework, but I was a contributor to the page. So that's a good example. You don't, you can contribute on many levels. There is an edit button on the top of the page, and that points you to, oops, sorry. Point is getting weird. Yeah, and that if you click the edit button, you are redirected to GitHub, of course, and you can see that all the documentation from Microsoft, or most of on docs.microsoft.com, is included on GitHub. This is the GitHub repo SP DevDocs with SharePoint developer documentation, and this is the page that that I like to change. So you can just edit the file here if you want. If you just want to work in the browser, like I said, for small changes, why not? It's not really bad. But if you want, you can just clone this repository, SPDevDocs, to your PC, and then contribute, and then try to get your changes in. What is essential to know is that, of course, you don't have access to SPDevDocs to contribute directly. So what will happen is when you do so, and it goes automatically to the website, or if you use the command line, you have to do that yourself. It will tell you you're making changes in a project you don't have write access to. Submitting a change will write it in a new branch in your fork, Thomas Vochten SPDevDocs, so you can send a pull request. What will happen here is you click this edit button, it will copy the whole of SPDevDocs as a repository in my personal space, in my GitHub account. So it will be a complete copy. And when I can make changes there, preferably in a branch, especially for that change. And then from my GitHub repository, I can issue, or I can ask for a pull request to the main repository of SPDevDocs, and that's how it works. And then with a little bit of luck, they will integrate your changes, or one of the persons on the team will integrate your changes into the Microsoft documentation. And that's how this looks. So it's a little bit technical maybe, but once you've made your changes, I fixed the typo. In this case, I fixed the typo, and I want it to be integrated from my repository to the main SharePoint developer documentation. If you just made text changes, the merge will be automatic, because it's that just works. And then you can click this button, create pull request, and then the people on the SharePoint SPDevDocs will get a notification like Thomas Vochten wants to correct a typo, and then they can read all about it. There is a difference file that you can look at, and if that's okay, they can say, okay, integrate the pull request, and you contribute it to Microsoft official documentation. It works quite nice. So it doesn't have to be code. So to recap the typical workflow when you want to contribute to something on GitHub is, first you have to fork the repo. You can do that by hand. There is a fork button at every repo, or in the case of Microsoft documentation, it will, like I showed you in the screenshots, it will do that automatically for you. Then you typically create a branch for your change. You don't want to make changes to the master branch or the main branch or whatever it's called. You typically create a branch just for this small change. Then you make and test your changes, testing if it's really code. Then you create your pull request. You wait for it to be accepted, and then you can remove your branch, remove your fork, do whatever you want, because it's integrated into the main repository for that documentation or code. Something which is quite important is to learn about the pull requests etiquette. That means there are some, let's say, general rules and conventions. For example, if you're editing a PowerShell file from someone else, well, what you should probably not do is change the whole formatting of the file and rename all the variables because they don't adhere to the standard that you like, and then issue a pull request to say, okay, this looks much better. It's probably not what you should do if you don't want to get flamed. So learn about the etiquette, and usually every repository that is open for community contributions has some kind of file or README file with how they want you to interact with them. For example, if you have a bug, please use this template and specify which file it is, upload a screenshot, stuff like that. So before you contribute, go there and look at the rules or the way people interact with this repository. And that's not to be unpolite, that's just to keep it manageable, because some of these repositories are very, very, very busy, and it's simply not feasible to let everyone just contribute in the way they want. So learn about the etiquette. Some key takeaways. Getting started with Git is relatively simple. I've showed you the command prompt, and if you're not sure about the commands to use, the documentation is really good. But you can even use Visual Studio Code if you think that's simpler. Whatever works for you. So that's absolutely possible. The learning curve can be quite steep once you go beyond the basics. So Something else, if you're working with code, commit as often as you can. Every time you make a change, commit it to the repository. So you know that everything is changed, the history is kept. And also don't forget to pull regularly. That means if you're working in your branch and you leave it alone for a couple of days and you come back and you start working again, do a git pull. So all the changes from the main repository get pulled in. So you're always working with the up-to-date code. That's something I forgot to mention, I think. Learn to work with branches. And then, okay, learn about how these pull requests work. If you really want to check it out, there is an M365 UK repository in my GitHub repository. If you don't have anything to do later on tonight and you want to issue a pull request for something silly to my repo, I'll go ahead and I'll be sure to accept it. So yeah, in case of fire, git commit, git push, and leave the building. That's what developers should do when they're in a hurry. So I will create a video for the Git branch. I think that's a good idea because it's probably 15 minutes or something, that demo. So I'll make sure to upload that also to my presentations repo where you can find it. Or maybe Chirag, I don't know if you have another way to make these files available. That's
yeah, no, we'll point
possible.
to your GitHub. It's not a problem. So we'll make the slides and this YouTube available. Yeah,
I'll make sure to put everything there. And to finish, some additional resources. Scott Hanselman, well-known developer, recently published a very, very good getting started with Git series. And I think you don't have to be a developer to follow along. I also learned a few new things. It's quite recent. It's the last few weeks he did that. Git documentation. I know we IT professionals don't like documentation, but it's actually quite good. And last but not least, the reference to the article on how to make your command line a little bit prettier. That's also on the Microsoft website. So I want to thank you for your attendance. I hope you found it useful. Don't hesitate to reach out to me if you've got any questions afterwards. That's my Twitter handle. And you can download session materials through that QR code, which also points to the GitHub repository. Thank you. If there are any questions, I don't know how this will work.
No, thanks, Thomas. That was brilliant. I think a lot of tips, and like you say, it can be a bit nervous for some of the IT pros, and your presentation just says it how it is. Very easy to kind of get started. So yeah, no, I really appreciate for having being here, and so thank you very much for that.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And so let's have a look at the questions. So I'll probably give a couple of minutes for the folks. And please don't be shy, attendees. This is equally just for you. So no question is a daft question. Just fire away. And I think Thomas will do his very best to even answer maybe level 300, 400 questions.
Yeah, well, that's I'm by no means a real developer. So if you are asking me about a very difficult branching strategy or something, I'm not sure if I will be able to answer, but well.
No, sure. So at the moment we don't have, which is good.
No worries. People know where to find me now. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, but yeah, I think what we'll do just while we wait for if we do get a question or two from the attendees, what we'll do, we'll take a break, and I'll just share the presentation slides so that all the attendees can post their feedback. So if I just go to that. Okay, yeah, there we are. So yeah, so there's the link over there. If you can please not just for the event purposes, but also for Thomas. So if you have any things that you would like to see in the presentation, then at least if Thomas does present this session next time, then at least he can incorporate that feedback into his session. So if you can either scan through your mobile or just go onto that link, texture.ag/M365 UK feedback. And like I said earlier, the slides and the session video on YouTube channel will be made available. I try to do it by within 2 days, so hopefully by Friday you'll have those things available. And so with that, don't know, most folks I think are from UK, but maybe from other parts, but it's very hot. I'm going to grab a glass of water. Suggest you do that if not already. And we'll catch up in 10 minutes. So that's 5:10 in UK time. And once again, Thomas, thanks. I think you're staying around. So if we do get questions later on, then we can try and answer those as well. But okay, hi, welcome back everyone to M365 UK user group. So we've had the first session already from Thomas Vochten from Belgium on the GitHub and the related tips around getting started. And so we thank him for that. And so now we're moving on to the second session, which is with Jasper Osterveld. And so delighted to have him with us today. And again, big thanks for taking his time out to be with us here. And with Jasper, as many of you may know, but long-time SharePoint guy as well, and amongst other things as well, and Teams, Microsoft 365 in general, and basically says how it is. So without further much ado, I'll hand over to Jasper. Take it away, Jasper.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Let me share my screen. See if it works. Let's see. I'll just do screen one. Are you able to hear me clearly?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Good. And you can minimize the Teams window thing as well.
Yeah, otherwise Thomas will remind me.
Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Good. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Today I'm going to talk about governance and Microsoft Teams. Basically my favorite topic of the moment. I do a lot of work around this. So brief introduction. Sorry, I have to look at my big face. I need to change the slide, but this is still our company slide deck. We got a new one. So I'll keep it brief. I work for InSpark, a Dutch company. We're based a little bit outside of Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and I work as a modern workplace consultant. And I basically support customers implementing the modern workplace, no surprise there. And my focus is around governance, compliance, and Microsoft Teams. But I still do SharePoint projects as well. And as you all know, SharePoint is very much related to Microsoft Teams. I've also been an MVP for, I believe, like 6 or 7 years. And I also live in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. So that's that's enough about me. And at the end of the session, I will present my contact details. So if you want to get in touch. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so how do you realize a successful Microsoft Teams governance strategy? So basically what I'm going to do today, I'm basically going to talk to you if you're my customer. Probably a little bit more informal, but the topics I discussed, the content is very much the same. So yeah, these are basically our and my best practices. So first we start with a governance workshop, and we go into depth on all of these topics. Then you need to set up a governance strategy. And last but not least, you also need to implement your governance strategy as well. So what I normally do is when I talk to customers and give a workshop around this topic, I also ask what their knowledge is around Teams and experience around Teams. And then I often do a little demo. And I'm not going to do that now because it will just cost too much time. But that demo basically includes basic stuff like how do you create a team, how do you work with channels, the conversations, mentioning people, just the basic stuff. And you can take like 15 to 20 minutes for that. But I do recommend doing that because if you just dive into the governance stuff, it can result in a disconnect with people. They don't really understand what you're talking about. But if you show it, you show how Teams works, stuff, everything, it relates a bit more. But I'll save you that now because it's just too much time. But yeah, normally I do recommend doing that. What I will do now today is basically go over a little bit of the benefits and the plus points of Microsoft Teams. So how Microsoft positions Teams, and I basically support it as well, is that Teams is a hub for collaboration. I just added communication as well because you do communicate in Teams, right? You communicate with your group, right? Do the group chat, but you also have the personal chat that we know from Skype for Business, of course. So there is a communication aspect, but of course the main focus is collaboration. So Teams is split up in a couple of pillars. The first one is chat. And I will dive into each of these after this this summary slide. And the next one is meetings. Calling, and that one I will skip because with calling I'm basically referring to the call center functionality, and that's way out of my comfort zone and expertise and knowledge. So I'm not even going to pretend I know what I'm talking about. But yeah, but that is basically going into about that topic. So setting up a whole call center and basically replacing your own phone center and everything. Yeah. Files, of course. And last but not least, we also have apps and workflows. I am going to drink a lot of water because I think Thomas said it as well. I'm looking behind me. The fan now says 27 degrees, so I need to stay dehydrated. Otherwise, it's going to be a short session. So bear with me. Oh man. So let's talk about chat first. What I like about chat is it does really realize a more open and informal culture within your company. Back home, the default, you know, most companies are very informal and more open, but this of course differs per country. But if you are a more formal company, you kind of want to break that. You know, you want to push more towards more informal. Chat is perfect because the whole idea and concept of chat is informal, right? You know, if you compare it, yeah. So I was looking over. If you compare it to email is a lot more formal. With chat, you know, you have the gifs, the memes, stickers, and it's just shorter. Smileys, of course. So you know, the characteristics of that already make it more informal and open, and that definitely helps. Now, ideally, your email will reduce because you know you're doing all your conversations and questions and remarks and sharing expertise will all be done in Teams. So you're sending and receiving less emails. What I do notice is that there's a new challenge in Teams. That's no notification challenge. That's basically, it's kind of turning into a replacement of email because you know, a lot of stuff can happen, right? People can mention you. There's new conversations and channels you follow. So there's a lot of stuff popping up that's very distracting and it can be very annoying. There are ways to reduce that. That's maybe, you know, a topic for a different session, but yeah, please look at your notification settings. Otherwise, you know, that will just be just as annoying as all the emails you normally receive. And of course, you can use chat anywhere you want because you have the Teams mobile app. That's an excellent app. I still use it on a daily basis, a little bit less now because of all the Corona, COVID stuff. But before that, I used it really on a daily basis. It's an excellent app. Meetings. So a great example. We can work from the office, not everybody, but you can apply for it and they minimize the amount of people. So what we had yesterday, we had a meeting with a customer and I believe there were 6 people, but only 2 or 3 of them went to our office and 2 of us were at the office. So, you know, we minimized the amount of people there. So a couple people joined the meeting from their own office, you know, at home or the company office. So we're all together, basically doing what we're doing now. I was sharing my presentation, I was doing demos, we had some Q&A, and that's really excellent with Teams that you can do that. So it's a lot more efficient, right? And what I said, like I'm not doing it now, but you also have the whiteboard app. That's really cool, actually, especially if you have like a service hub at your office. if you enough money, you can do it at home, but I'm not that wealthy. But then you could do a meeting like this and you can start taking notes, and those notes are automatically saved, and yeah, you can use them afterwards as well. That's excellent. I really like that. Yeah, this one is a little bit lame now because of the whole Corona stuff. But yeah, ideally you don't have to travel that much to meetings because you can do it online like this. That said, sometimes it is nice to meet face to face, but you don't have to do it all the time. So the traveling can definitely reduce, right? And last but not least, we have like you can increase the engagement, and that's basically what we're doing now. We're using live meetings. So let's say, you know, the management team or, you know, even higher up C-level, they want to discuss the new strategy, or maybe when Corona just started, they want to talk about that. You can use the whole live meeting aspect to really reach a lot of people and definitely increase the engagement of everybody. So that's definitely an interesting one to look into. And that, yeah, that also comes out of the box with Teams. So files, again, if you set it up correctly, you can definitely save a lot of time because you know where your files are. Let's say you're looking for your project files and you collaborate around that project in Teams. You go to the team, you open the Files tab, and that's where your files are. Again, I laugh a little bit because, you know, we all know it's not always that case, but if you do the adoption properly and you help each other, it definitely saves a lot of time looking for files because they should be in that one team. It's also a lot more efficient to collaborate. And with that, I'm basically referring to the co-authoring experience. That's actually really old. Like, I think it must be like 4 or 5 years, maybe even longer. But still, there's a lot of customers who are not aware of that functionality. And if you show it to them, and really, people really like it. They can definitely immediately see the benefit, because you don't have to email files. You can just do directly in the file. It's all your changes are being saved. You have the versioning if you want to go back. It's just a lot faster as well. I think the best experience still is for Word, but PowerPoint is pretty good actually too. And what I actually noticed is that now in Excel, you can also work together and you can basically also save your own views. And I actually really like that. That's very nice. OneNote, I'm having some issues once in a while with some conflicts of versioning. But that aside, it's definitely a really, really helpful way to have a more efficient collaboration. Well, and of course, these days, we don't only work with your colleagues, but you also work with external people, suppliers, or your customers, for example. You can invite them and work together within teams. And again, that's a lot more efficient, easier as well. And of course, there's some governance related to that, so we'll dive into that as well. But it's definitely a lot easier than it used to be. So this one I really like, and not because this is not really like what I do on a daily basis, but I like to tell you an example how we use it at our office. So what we had before this, I want to stop talking about Corona, but unfortunately, this is the time we live in. When everybody was still at the office, our company would provide lunch, and if you would participate in lunch, you would have to pay, I don't know, like €2 or something. So beforehand, our back office employees, she had to like write down who was having lunch. It's a bit waste of time. Not really efficient. So what a colleague did, he created a bot. And the bot basically checks if you're at the office, and I believe it does it with the Wi-Fi. So let's say I was at the office, I get a notification around 1 o'clock, and it says, hey, I noticed you're at the office. Did you participate in lunch? Now, that's when the honorary system pops up, because I can lie and say I didn't at lunch. Well, I did. To be fair, I really don't think anybody's doing that. That's just really like, lame, putting it lightly. So let's say I say yes. A signal is being sent to an external system. That's not a Microsoft system, and it registers that, and it withdraws the amount of money from a salary at the end of the month. So that's really nice. So I can integrate that app and the workflow with external systems, not only Microsoft but also external ones. And by the end, it definitely saved cost, because my colleague, she doesn't have to do this anymore. She doesn't have to maintain a piece of paper and like enter in the system. It's just very time consuming, not efficient. So she now can focus on other more relevant tasks. Simple example. There are many, many more, but this is definitely one that has a lot of value and opportunity. So I recommend everybody looking into that. Okay, well, then normally I do the demo now. And I basically do this summary, and then ideally people have seen that with Teams, you really have a central and integrated work experience, because, within Teams, I have access to Yammer now. I have my OneDrive files. Of course, I have all my collaboration spaces that includes SharePoint. I can use Planner, Stream. I'm probably missing a couple more, but it really saves me a lot of time, because I can use the one application, Teams, and I don't have to open multiple browsers. So, that really also reduces an increase of my productivity, because I save a lot of time by switching from other applications. That also reduces my concentration levels, et cetera, et cetera. So people really see this after the show and the demo as well. And a lot of companies out there really still want to increase and accelerate their digital transformation. Well, these are all cloud-based applications. So yeah, that's win-win, basically. And last but not least, this is always a funny one, because I always emphasize that your data is safe with Microsoft in their data centers, because, and then people start to laugh, especially some customers, because they think you have to say that because you work at Microsoft. That's not the case at all. But basically, if there's no trust from their customers, yeah, they can basically stop tomorrow. That said, you have a responsibility yourself to make sure once the data is on your and your colleagues' devices, that you set up certain security aspects, compliance aspects. So that's what we'll talk about as well. But there's a difference between those two. So that's one I'll always like to emphasize as well. Oh man, it's so warm here. It's insane. One more. Let's take another sip. So once I've talked about this, I ask customers, You've now seen Teams, you hear me talk about some of the advantages. What are your worries? And it's interesting that after a couple of workshops I did, I basically have a list of the, all the worries. There's not really any new ones being added. IT often worries about explosion of teams, and not only IT, also employees themselves, because they're worried they cannot find the teams they're looking for. Duplication of teams, right? And these worries start from a complete lack of governance, right? So you have teams and everybody can create a team, right? That's where this comes from. So they also worry about duplication of teams. What is actually the purpose of a team? Like, what kind of files are stored here? Is it sensitive or not? Right? It can be very unclear. The Teams doesn't have the best search engine. If you want to search for a team, it's not the best one out there. So it can be hard to find certain teams. This one I found interesting, but I did notice that and they also told me that some clients find it hard to create a team. And maybe as a techie, you're like, oh, that's silly. But think about it, like maybe after this session or tomorrow, create a team. And there are basically a lot of options, especially if you do a new team and you can have the option, you can base it on a Microsoft 365 group. And it's like, what is that? I've never heard of it. So try it and then think about it from an end user perspective that's not as technical and doesn't have all the background knowledge. It definitely can be complex. And this one is very relevant, of course. If there's data can leak. Nobody knows what kind of data is stored, who is shared with, internally, externally, so that can lead up to a data leak. So if you don't address these things, again, this is not rocket science, but it will end up in a failed user adoption, right? People don't like to use it, they're afraid to use it, don't know how to use it, right? And last but not least, IT will be stuck with a lot of maintenance, and that kind of defeats the purpose. So that's why governance is very important. Leads me up to this slide. What's the importance of governance? And what I've done on purpose is leave out the definition of governance, because I don't think that really matters. I think it's more important why it's important. So I don't focus on the what, but more on the why. So first of all, I believe it's very important to connect the IT, if not the IT, connect IT and business. It's because there's often a mismatch in expectations, and they don't really know from each other what their accountability is. So the business, they just want to collaborate, right? And they don't really are aware of maintenance aspects, like maintaining all the groups that are created, maintaining all the users, right? The Active Directory, all that sort of stuff. They're not aware of that, right? And IT, they realize that their colleagues who are in the business side want to collaborate, but they have other responsibilities as well. So if you bring these two together, there will be more understanding, right? And it can take away a lot of frustration and maybe miscommunication when you start rolling out teams. So it's very important when you do governance that you bring in IT with business people. Just don't do just business or just IT. That's not going to work. You need to bring them together so they understand what they want and what their accountabilities are, responsibilities are. It's very important. From a governance side, you're going to take a lot of decisions that impact your adoption strategy. I'm assuming you're doing adoption, right? That should be a given these days. But for example, within governance, we're making decisions about what kind of templates we're using. Is external access allowed? How do I request a team, for example? That's all stuff you need to address in your adoption strategy. So my advice would be to start with adoption and governance at the same time. And these days, there's also a lot of law and regulations. Well, I want to say EU. It's a bit painful these days, but we have, for example, GDPR. That is stuff that is important, right? That you have to comply to that. And next to that, you also have probably internal procedures. How are you supposed to? Are you able? How to say it? Am I allowed to work with third-party apps, for example? And maybe you're aware if in Teams, if you just turn on the default, you can integrate and use a lot of third-party apps. Where, to be fair, like I've been in IT for a while, I don't know 80% of those. Again, it brings risks with it. If you just allow that and you're able to turn it on, and then you also have your law and regulations. What kind of data I'm allowed to store? Who am I allowed to share it with? So if you don't do anything with that, that can lead up to a lot of problems. And last but not least, this is a little bit more technical, and yeah, this is for when I do this presentation with people from the business. This can be not hard to understand, but this, this is not really like a term they've heard before, and why would they? Because it's not. I don't think for them it's that relevant, and then I understand why they haven't heard from it. But it is very important to show them the impact of teams in combination with groups, because a couple things happen. First of all, let's say I allow everybody to create a team. What happens in Azure AD? A lot of groups are created. So let's say you have an administrator, and then he or she is not aware that you're rolling out teams, and it's like, what's happening? Where are all these hundreds of groups coming from? And they, for example, can delete it by accident. That's basically an anecdote I'm telling after this slide. So that's one thing that happens. And after that, all these services are connected, and some of them pop up immediately, and some of them take a little bit longer. But when I create a team, there's a SharePoint team site created, a plan and planner pops up, the group and stream pops up, there's a shared calendar, a shared inbox. So a lot of stuff is happening. So let's say you have people working with these other services, they can be very confused, and it can lead up to issues. Same with administrators. So if you have a SharePoint admin, he or she can be like, where are all these team sites coming from? So that's something you want to prevent. So this definitely helps them explain the impact of what happens when you create a team. It's just not a team, it's a lot more. And that's fine, right? I love it. It's fantastic. It definitely improves your collaboration experience, but it's something that has impact on your environment. So a small anecdote. So we have a customer that had no governance, and they have a couple of branches abroad. I believe somebody in the US created a team, called it test, uploaded sensitive data. Don't tell me why. No, I think you know what this leads up to. IT was like, well, this is a test. This can go. So thankfully they were on time to restore it, but it could have led to a serious issue. And that's basically because they had no governance in place, right? I'm not mentioning the name of the customer, but yeah, it was a bit painful. So you start with the first step. That's the workshop. There are a couple topics we discuss. Looking at time, I can't go into depth of all of them. I'm just picking one, but you should define your scope, right? What is the scope of your team's rollout? What are your vision and goals for rolling out teams? And that's something that should also be addressed from the adoption side of things. So ideally, that is answered within your adoption workshop, so you can just reuse it here. You need to have a group of people, who come together, like regularly, maybe once every month, once every quarter, to basically go over the strategy, to review it, and maybe make some adjustments as well. You need to address all the roles and responsibilities, and these vary from administration roles to roles of certain departments, to basically manage expectations and prevent miscommunication. So for example, I know who to go to when I have issues with Teams, for example. This is the one we'll dive into. Processes and procedures you need to think about for something like when somebody, the employment procedure. So let's say somebody joins the company, how can he or she immediately get a license or immediately get assigned to a certain team? And of course, new features and updates. You're in the cloud, so Microsoft is continuously updating, especially with Teams lately, especially since the Corona crisis, it's like exploded. So you need to set something up that, some people monitor it and do some communication and yeah, basically maintain and guide that whole process. Too much to talk about, I cannot do all those topics. I need a couple more hours. So I'm going to focus on the workload one. These are all the topics I want to discuss. So I've just listed them here, and on each slide I will dive into it. Let me check my time. I'm still good. Yeah, so the first thing you need to do, you need to sit down internally with your customers and ask, okay, you want to use Teams? What do you want to use it for? What kind of collaboration? And I call it templates, but you can call shapes or forms, whatever. Because there's a differentiation, right? You can want to use Teams for maybe department use, projects, cross-department, or maybe for customers. Internally, we create a team for every customer, and then every project is a channel. So this is something you need to do first. Define your collaboration templates, yeah? And once you've done that, then you go to the next step where you, oh, sorry, I don't have my speaker notes, but keep it simple and start small. So don't start defining 10 templates. Start with 2 or 4 max, because that it already has a huge impact on people, and especially if you have strict governance, there's a lot of stuff that has to be done. So start small. And I noticed that these are the most common 4 out there. So let's say we stick with these 4, right? Then we go to the next step, and then we say, okay, let's define the naming policy for each of these collaboration templates. But what options are there actually? You can use, for example, an automatic naming policy through Azure AD, where you add a predefined word as a prefix or a suffix. And you can do it in combination with an AAD property. It sounds very confusing, but let's say you can define it, for example, as a word, the word collaboration, and the department of the person who creates the team always needs to be added to the team name. So it can be, oh man, I'm always terrible at these things. Mobile portal, for collaboration, mobile portal, and then IT. Nobody uses it. I haven't come across a customer who uses it, but that is how you could use it. You can also connect it to a provisioning solution. You can create your own, or you can use Provision Point or AvePoint, and probably a couple more out there as well that can do that for you as well. Let's say you go for the full self-service scenario where people can create teams by themselves. You can leave it up to them, or you don't apply any, and that's fine too, because you don't have to apply a naming policy. You know, there's some advantages to it, but you know that doesn't always have to apply to you or your customers. So as an example, let's say you want to, once you've created a team, or yourself, or provisioning, whatever, we will address it at the end. You, for example, say when a team is created, for example, project, PROJ, is always added, and then a dash, and then the name of the team. And this, what you can also do, you can only do this from a provisioning side, is also apply that to the URL of the SharePoint team site. And that can increase the findability of those teams. That's basically what it's aimed for. So it makes it easier to find teams, right? There are some challenges. If you use an AAD naming policy, your AAD really needs to be up to date, and you need to find a license for it as well. I believe the P1, to be fair, I believe that's most people have now, but you still need to use it. Again, it's hard. Let's say you use those 4 templates, right? Customer, what's it, department, cross department, and projects. You try to find one word that describes all 4 of those. It's not really possible. And if you do the self-service scenario, people are just going to forget. It's not that they don't want to apply a naming policy, they just don't remember it. You can't really blame them, to be fair. So what I will do each time I discuss a topic, I will give my advice, and I say only do a naming policy when it's really necessary, when there's really a business case for it. This was a good one, actually. I was working together with a local district. I always try to pronounce that word before, but I'm not going to stumble over the word. So they're a local district. They had an Office 365 tenant, and they shared it with other local districts and a couple external companies. For them, this was crucial because by applying a naming policy that they essentially are doing through a provisioning solution, they can really see through what district or other company this team belongs to. And that I totally understand that, because it makes it a lot more easier for them to manage, because they know, hey, District A created these teams. So for management purposes and report purposes, it's very useful. So in that case, perfect. So again, that's something you have to judge yourself if it's really, you know, if that's a really business case for you, for your company. Oh man, it's so warm. Jeez. Still 27 degrees. So next up is external access. Couple options, and it's very straightforward. You allow it for all teams. You do it for a selection. You disable it for all teams. And these days, it's very nice. You can also combine it with a sensitivity label. And that's something I will show you as well in an example, what it looks like. Some advantages and challenges. The advantages for sure by allowing external access is that you reduce shadow IT, because you reduce the need for other tools to share, for example, documents with external people. It's a lot more efficient. You know, you don't have to email it, and you don't have to use external tools. You can just use the tools you get to your disposal at your company. But data classification is crucial. What do I mean by that? Of course, an external person needs to have access before he or she can access files, right, in a team. But after that, they can do what they want. They can download all the files, and send it all over the world. But by applying data classification, right, with sensitivity labels, you can prevent that. You can prevent them from sharing it with unauthorized people. Only owners are able to invite external people, so they have an additional responsibility. And that's something you can address in your adoption strategy with training sessions, for example, and other communication materials. My advice is to just turn it on for all teams, right? Because if you make a differentiation between those 4 collaboration templates, for example, you say, I want it off for departments. It's like, yeah, you can do that, but it creates some complexity for the whole provisioning or the self-service scenario. So turn it on for all teams, because there are ways to monitor it and to manage it. There is something called Azure Access Reviews. You require a P2 license, where you can set an access review policy on certain teams where the owners have to review the membership. So they can, for example, once a month say, okay, all these guests have to go, or it can also be for internal people. The only downside is it's not really flexible, so you have to add teams to that policy. This is the main downside now. You can also create your own. Martina Grom had created a good solution where she basically uses some Azure stuff, and this goes way above my head, but create a really nice solution that's on their website where you can send an email to the owners where they are notified, hey, you have these users, external users in your teams, can you please review them? Social control. People will notice if they're external people. So let's say in your department, and you see like guests popping up, it's like, I don't think this is supposed to happen. Can you, ask a question, maybe remove them? So that's very powerful as well. Education, of course, and definitely start with data classification, because this will reduce the data leaks, the risk for that. You can't really 100% prevent it, but you can definitely reduce it by a lot. Next up, expiration policies. Expiration period / policies, that's the same. Again, very straightforward. You can enable it for all teams, selection of teams, or no teams. And with an expiration period, you basically say after this period, 6 months, a year, if there's no activity in a team, it will be moved to the recycle bin. And it stays there for 30 days. And after those 30 days, it will be removed. It'll just be deleted forever. So that's something you can decide on. There's some advantages, of course. But before I dive into that, there is something nice these days, and that's an activity check. So let's say there are teams that are actually being used, like departments. There won't be an email being sent to those owners like, hey, do you want to renew this team? Or there won't be a pop-up or like a little, I believe in the team itself, that's a little notification. That won't show up, because that is strange. Like, why would I be asked to renew my team if I'm using it on a daily basis? So the Microsoft checks if what happens in around files in the SharePoint site. You can see it here. So it's, it's just the usage stuff. So if that happens, it will be automatically renewed for another 6 months or a year, basically what you determine. And again, if you open a channel, that's also enough. That's already a signal that's like, okay, it's being used. So that prevents owners being bothered with like unnecessary emails or notifications. Advantages, yeah, well, you keep your environment clean, right? There's no unused teams. Again, there can, it's fine. Like, it's not really bad if there's unused teams, but I personally, I like to have a clean environment, so this helps. It reduces maintenance for IT, because IT doesn't have to do it. They can just let the expiration policy do it by themselves in combination with the owners. Yeah, if you don't have any additional backup, it's gone after 30 days, and everything's gone, right? Not just the team with the chats. It's SharePoint, Planner, Stream, what else is connected, Power BI, maybe a couple other things. It's all gone, right? And again, the owners, they receive an email asking them, hey, we notice it's not being used. They get that 30 days before. Let me check my time. But run a little bit over, but I think it's fine. So they will get an email 30 days before. Then if they don't respond, 15, and then 1, asking them, hey, do you want to renew this team? If they don't respond, it will eventually be deleted by themselves, but they have to answer that email. So that's very important that you educate them as well. Oh, sorry, I went too fast. You need to have some retention policies in place, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a second, but that can also prevent the accidental deletion of teams that actually contain valuable data. So my advice, just turn it on for a year, because you can always reduce it or extend it. But I think that's a good baseline point. I know what I mean. Definitely look into retention policies, and we'll discuss that in a second. I want to talk a little bit more about compliance. The privacy is, again, very straightforward. You can do private teams. So that means the owner has to invite people to participate. Public teams, everybody can participate. And org-wide, that's basically a team that will automatically add all internal users. And I believe there's a max of 5. I haven't seen it being used that much. It was, a while back, it was a little bit up in the air, like, oh, is this going to replace Yammer? No, that's not going to happen, because, Yammer basically came back with a beautiful design, really nice functionalities. But that is what it is. So if I create an org-wide team, everybody is automatically invited. Yeah, so that's basically very straightforward. So I advise to do open by default to basically increase knowledge sharing and collaboration. Yeah, that said, I do understand there are teams that contain sensitive stuff, but again, you can, if you can decide by yourself, you can just close, just set them on private. But I think open by default should be the standard. Again, also if it's allowed, right? I know there's some law and regulations that prevent that. So again, look into that. But if that's not the case, definitely go to open by default. Yeah, that said, owners can change the privacy settings, so they can go from private to public and vice versa. Org-wide, that's just an org-wide. You cannot really undo that. Backup and restore. So if you delete a team, the team with everything included will be stored for 30 days in recycle bin and will then be deleted. Channels have their own recycle bin with the same time frame. Content is stored in the SharePoint recycle bin for 93 days. And the videos are stored for 30 days in a recycle bin in stream. Yeah, again, that's fine. It doesn't have to be an issue, but you do have to review those default. That's not even settings. You can't really change it. Default options. Option is also probably not a good word. It's just the way it is. So if that's not sufficient for you, you definitely have to look into additional software. 8point, for example, I've seen that in action. It's very nice, actually. You have to look into that. It will bring additional cost with it, but if that's the case, that's just the way it is. And again, you can also apply those retention rules to prevent accidental deletion. So next up, sensitivity labels. So these are the same labels you can apply for your data classification, right? For example, say, hey, this is an internal document and it's sensitive, so it cannot be shared with external people. You can extend that sensitivity label now for Teams or for SharePoint team sites, so basically for Microsoft 365 groups. You can set the default privacy. You can allow or not allow guest access, and you can also determine what needs to happen with unmanaged devices. So that means that if somebody has an unmanaged device, he or she cannot access files, or they can only do the browser, or they can use the full experience through the desktop apps. For now, the label you put on a team does nothing with the content. So it's not like I say team A is highly sensitive and automatically all the files are marked highly sensitive as well. I'm very positive that this will be available in the near future, don't know when, but for now that's just not the case. So this is what it looks like. So this is just the settings menu. So you can see that here I can say set those 3 options. And then, for example, I create a team and I select this label, and you see I can only select the private privacy option. So my advice would be to definitely combine this with self-service team creation, because then an employee, they can create a team and they say, okay, I know this team is highly sensitive. So then automatically these 3 settings are applied. You have to do something with data classification. I'm going to repeat it a lot. Definitely do it in a separate project. This is just too much to do within your governance project, to set up this whole governance strategy. That's just going to take so much more time, but definitely do it and address it as well. Data loss prevention, again, what this can do, this can prevent the sharing of sensitive data, for example, social security numbers, in chat, and also, for example, with documents. This one is very strange to me. For DLP and chat, you need an E5 license. Don't ask me why. I added a couple examples. This is what it looks like with chat. So this is just gibberish messages, of course. So I added it, but there's an IBAN number in there, and I immediately get a pop-up and a block message. And then at number 4, you can provide options for your employees, and this is just an example I did, so I allow them to override it, but you can also take it away. But here, at least you can provide some additional information why this message is blocked. Same works for content, very similar. You see a message, and you also see that yeah, the same at number 3 is the same one basically. So you can do it for chat or for content. Again, check regulations that apply to your business and internal procedures. You have to do a lot of testing for DLP, because on paper it sounds very easy and straightforward. Once you start working with it, it doesn't always work the way you expect it to work. You definitely need to, if you launch it, you turn it on, please send out some communication. People get very confused and frustrated if they get those error messages, but without them knowing why it's there and what the purposes of it is. Yeah. And again, this is where you have that connection with adoption. You remember I mentioned the reasons why governance is important? This is why. So if you, for example, from governance point of view, say, hey, we have to use DLP, you have to address that in your adoption strategy. Yep. Set up a separate project, just like data classification. So with retention, let me see my time. We good. You can retain content or chat. You can do both or one of them for an X amount of period. So days, months, years. You can say, okay, I retain it, so it cannot be deleted, but after that period, I want to delete it, or I just want to delete what's left after that period. It's a bit confusing, but it will make more sense when you look into it. I believe that retention for chat is still not supported in private channels. I could be wrong. I haven't checked it recently, but that was the case. So if you Google that, you'll immediately get an answer. This is the same as with data classification and DLP. A lot of testing, education, and set it up in a different project. You cannot do this within your workshop. You need to address it, but the execution needs to be done in a separate project. Maybe you're wondering, like, hey, why doesn't he talk about like self-service and provisioning? I do this last, because basically all the stuff we just discussed determines what your creation process is going to be like, right? And is it going to be a self-service for all employees within the application? Is it going to be for a selection of people? Or is it going to be more controlled, but through a provisioning mechanism for all employees? So what does this determine? You need to look, am I going to use collaboration formats? Because often if you have one and there's no additional governance needed for all those topics they discuss, you can just use self-service. It's just easier. For first look at your collaboration formats, then check, hey, does one of those need to have a unique naming policy? Yes or no? Does any of one need to have strict external access policies? Because I advise turn it off for all, but yeah, there are customers who really don't want that. Well, then yeah, that's fine, but that impacts the decision, and the decision that impacts the usage of self-service or provisioning. I believe this is the last one. And are there also really strict expiration policies? Because what you often can do, you can often do a combination. So let's say one needs 6 months, another one needs a year. You can, if you're smart, you can use some sort of overlap and use the activity check. But sometimes it just doesn't work out. So those things, sorry, I brought back. Those things determine the usage of self-service or provisioning. And again, there's no wrong or right. It really determines on your business case, and your business requirements, right? I'm not judging. Again, you do what works for you. That's what's most important by the end of the day. No? Once you've done that, there's a couple other things you need to look into. There's our policies. So the ones I'm going to discuss now for policies, you can basically address is, yeah, this is it. You can assign policies to the whole to all employees or a selection. So that's what you can do. So you can say, hey, who is allowed to discover private teams? And it means that even if an owner has set a team on private, the owner can say, okay, it's fine if people find it in search. And of course, is everybody or a selection of people allowed to create private channels? Message policies, think about, are people allowed to edit their own posts? Are smileys allowed, gifs allowed? The whole read receipts so that people can see if somebody read your message, yes or no. I personally hate that. So you can often leave it up to people themselves. Apps, are all Microsoft apps allowed? that I would advise, because it's nice if you can use Planner and whiteboards and all those other Microsoft apps. But are people also allowed to use all external apps? I would advise to turn it off in the beginning and then look at what they actually really need. And some standard settings. Are you allowed to use the tagging process, the tagging mechanism? Are you allowed? Do you allow people to access their third-party storages, their Google Drive or their Box or Dropbox? Now, once you've done all this, you discuss this all in a workshop. And what we do 2 workshops. We do one where we basically go over what is Teams, what are the benefits, why governance, all these topics I discussed. And then we assign tasks at the end, let it sit, give it a couple weeks. And then in the follow-up session, we basically need an agreement on all these topics. Add them in a document. I say document. You can do a SharePoint page, whatever suits you, as long as you put it somewhere where everybody will read it. I present it. It's like, hey, this is what we discussed. Again, everybody agrees. There's no more feedback. And then you can finalize your strategy. And then that's, at that point of time, that's the strategy. But that's why the steering committee is so important. It needs to evolve, right? Because you know how it goes. The world changes. Stupid Corona is here. Your company changes. Microsoft changes features. So you need to keep it up to date. Last step, you need to implement it, right? Because you probably made certain decisions that impact how Microsoft Teams is set up, like the provisioning, allowing third-party apps. Just a couple examples. So you need to configure that. And maybe you need to set up a solution, like AvePoint has an excellent solution for cloud governance that really addresses the provisioning part. You can use Provision Point of 2, of course, also an excellent solution. Or you can use ShareGate Apricot, where they manage it more after a self-service scenario. So that's also an excellent tool. So I recommend looking at all of these. And again, match them with your requirements, with your needs, and then take a decision. Almost, we're done. Oh, not bad actually. What time is it? Oh, almost 7.
Nah, you're good, Jasper.
Yeah, okay.
A few minutes.
Okay, I'm just so hot. and
You've
hungry.
You've done very well. But yeah, if you can wrap up in a couple of minutes, that would be great.
Yeah. This is the almost the last one. I have one more silly slide, and then we're all good. But this is where you can reach me. You can reach me at Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever you prefer. My blog has a little bit more than Thomas's blog, but it's mainly also announcements and referrals to articles I write mainly for ShareGate. But I think mine is a little bit more active than Thomas's blog.
I'll remember that, Jasper.
At least I know you're still listening.
I am.
Yeah. So yeah, again, I have no idea who's attending, and that's the tricky part of the online sessions. But thank you. I'll click through. Thank you for listening in. If it's okay, I'll go for dinner because I'm really hungry and hot. But I can answer questions later as well, if that's okay. But I appreciate everybody listening in, and yeah, I hope to see you. I hope to see people eventually at live events again. But probably, yeah, for the next year we'll probably be online. Yeah, so
that's great. That's great, Jasper. Listen, so I think I just want to say big thanks to you, and also Thomas earlier on, to basically have you guys being here for us to present.
No problem at all.
Great session. I think is it's the Teams governance is, because I get that in my engagements a lot, and especially when the folks who are on SharePoint and they kind of rolled out with Teams first. And then they want to bring SharePoint or file shares along, and then that whole governance piece kind of makes very big and complicated, yep. Especially with limited resources that some of the organizations have. So, but yeah, definitely good tips there. And start small, work big, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
No, good stuff. So I think I'll just have a look at the Q&A. I think there are couple of questions. I think there was, if you don't mind, there was a question for Thomas earlier. I'll read it out. So Thomas, there was a question from Kevin McDonald. Could you recommend any repos that are looking for people to help out with? This was with your session earlier.
Yeah. I think a very good place to start is everything around the Microsoft 365 PnP initiative. They have a lot of not only code, also documentation and everything that you can contribute to. They also recently started documentation for IT pros, if I'm not mistaken. I haven't contributed to that myself yet, but that's probably the best way, especially if you're in the Microsoft 365 space, to start looking to see if you can be of any help.
Is that the community docs? Is it?
Yeah, community docs, exactly. Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, I've seen that few thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's still early, the community docs, but it's it's quite interesting. Yeah,
okay,
that's a good way to start.
Great, thanks for that, Thomas. Yeah, Jasper, over to you. There was a question from Paul Beck. Access review P2 license needed for all users and owners, or just the person who's setting it up?
Oh, I think we lost Jasper.
We have.
Oh.
We have. We'll give a couple of minutes. Actually, yeah, he has actually answered it. All users are part of the review, but check the website. It mentions it at the top. Okay, my feeling is the people who's reviewing it who need the license, and not everybody. But I'll post the link out, and we can check on that one. Okay. So yeah, good. I think once again, big thanks to the attendees. I've posted the link on the chat window there for the feedback, and so if you don't mind, please fill that out, and also any feedback that you may have or any particular sessions you would like to see, let me know, and I'll do my best to try and have that for you. But in the meantime, we have our next meeting on the 16th of September with Peter Rising, who's going to be talking about the information protection, the whole evolution of it, and he's recently published a book as well. So, looking forward to Peter's session next month. And then we have also Laura as well, so who's really into the Power BI, Power Apps, and some great examples that she'll be sharing as well. So we look forward to that. But in the meantime, take care of yourselves. And once again, big thanks to Thomas and Jasper, and hopefully see you guys somewhere on the community event. In the meantime, take care.